The kind of behavior that we'll see from consumers depends on the context. I've mentioned before that context is always vitally important when considering consumer behavior. So you see here a matrix of different kinds of behavior that relate to different kinds of product categories. So along the left, you see situations where there are either a lot of differences between the brands on offer or a few differences. And then along the top, the level of involvement the customer needs to have in the purchase process to make a decision. And we'll start with dissonance reducing, since we've just been talking about cognitive dissonance. So when the product is high involvement, but there is little discernible difference between different brands, a customer will make a decision based on trying to reduce the amount of cognitive dissonance they think they'll have at the other side of the purchase. So you take a good example, if you were redecorating your house and you were choosing a new paint. Now that's a process that's very involved because you need to do testing. It's an important thing because once the paint's on the wall, it's going to be there for a long time, so you need to get the decision right. But then the different brands of paint you see on the shelves of B&Q, for example, it's pretty difficult to get an idea of what distinguishes them other than the brand. So there's a really important role for marketing to play in that process, because the familiarity and the quality that someone feels coming from the brand will help them have a sense of reducing potential cognitive dissonance on the other side of a purchase. When you've got a high involvement product, just like we've been talking about with the paint, a high involvement product, but with significant difference between the brands, that's when you get a complex buyer behavior process. If you think of something like buying a car as a classic example in this category, because the customer needs to do a great deal of research and thinking about what they're going to do. It's involving a lot of their money, but there's a huge difference between one brand to the other. So if you're looking to buy a BMW versus a Ford, there are a great deal of differences in what the brands stand for, the kind of driver experience someone has, and so on. And so the process becomes complicated. There's significant amounts of perceived difference between the brands, and the level of involvement we're talking about refers to the actions the consumer must take in order to understand the product that they're going to buy. So high involvement is necessary because they need to learn, they need to research, they need to read reviews, they need to talk to others. I mean, in the car example, they also need to potentially take a test drive. So you see the amount of effort that needs to be invested by a customer in a complex decision. So we tend to see this, as I say, in high price purchases, something that's technologically complex as well. So buying a new laptop is another good example, because you've got a great deal of difference between, say, for example, buying a MacBook and a PC. So the amount of involvement increases. So the involvement process helps the consumer understand the difference between the brands and products they're motivated to buy, and then in turn this process is where the consumer develops a set of attitudes and beliefs towards their intended purchase. And these beliefs and attitudes, along with their motivations, which we discussed before, will influence heavily the decision. So there's a lot of effort that needs to be gone to by the marketing function of the business in order to try and achieve a sale when it's a complex purchasing process. When we've got few differences between the brands and low involvement, so the complete opposite of what we've just talked about, you get what's called habitual buyer behavior. And that refers to situations where a consumer has a low involvement in the purchase, in that they don't require to do a great deal of research to understand what it is that they're spending their money on. And there's lots of examples of product categories that would be habitual purchases, and they're usually everyday basic products, basic commodities. Classic one's toilet paper. That's why there's lots of money spent on advertising of toilet paper, because the brands need to remind us that they exist. And also, because it's low involvement, because there's such few discernible differences between the brands, they need to keep reminding us that they're there. So they have to keep using advert repetition to build brand familiarity, and they need to get into our perception. They need to find their way into our awareness through means that we come across on a daily basis. And that's why things like advertising on television, on the radio, are effective ways for low involvement and low difference brands, so habitual purchase products. So anything like salt, pepper, butter, even things like milk and, as I've mentioned, toilet paper are classic habitual purchase examples. Finally, we've got variety seeking. So they're kind of similar in some ways because they tend to be common day goods, but consumers may have a few beliefs about certain things and a few attitudes built around these products. So things like, let's say, crisps. Everybody likes crisps. Most consumers will buy a particular brand with very little evaluation before the purchase. In fact, in product categories like crisps, evaluation tends to happen during consumption of the product. So beliefs and attitudes will come during the experience of eating them, or let's say using them at parties or whatever. And the next time the consumer is ready to buy, they'll sometimes buy the same brand if the experience was favorable, but they also might just decide at random to pick another brand purely out of boredom or to try something different. So all of this happens for the sake of trying something new, and negative beliefs or attitudes about a particular brand don't really enter into the decision-making process. So the marketing strategy might differ for the market leader versus competitors trying to grab a market share. Leaders will encourage habitual buying, dominating shelf space in supermarkets and keeping shelves stocked, running frequent reminder advertising. So you can see there's a slightly close relationship between the low involvement products in this space.